Money can't buy style. That's one of the most common pieces of fashion advice, and I agree. Then I read this. If you have zero swag, affordable alternatives are not gonna help you. That seems kind of harsh. Some of my best pickups have been more affordable items, and I'd happily recommend brands like Uniqlo to anyone. Even in the last video, we talked about the value of all price points of different items of clothing. But is there some truth in this? To find out, we're going to talk about how affordable alternatives can trick people into being less happy with their wardrobe, and how changing our mindset when buying stuff, not just spending more money on clothes, is the key to buying awesome clothing that you're gonna love. We'll use the Blackbird's Biplane article this sentence is from as a reference point too. This is Arwen here. Is affordable clothing whack? Let's talk about it. I want us to shift our mindset when it comes to what clothing to buy. I could tell you why, but it's even better if I show you, so time to whip out my highly scientific graph. Here we have price versus how much you like something. Every piece of clothing fits somewhere on this line. You've got the expensive stuff you really like, mid-price stuff you don't like as much, cheap stuff you kinda like, etc, etc. To decide what clothing to buy, you mentally draw a line on this graph. In order to spend X amount of money on something, you have to like it Y amount. Above the line is stuff you'd consider buying, below it is stuff you wouldn't. Think about what that line looks like for you. I'll wait here. Most people probably drew a line that looks something like this. If you're spending a lot of money on something, you have to really, really like it in order to consider it. But if something's really cheap, even if you only like it a little bit, you're still getting a good deal. This end of the line makes sense, this end of the line doesn't. Why? Because clothing at this end of the scale enters your wardrobe that you're not really that hyped about, and because it's more affordable, you're probably buying more of it. Over time, you end up with a bunch of clothing that you only like this much. Obviously, unless you've got the unlimited money cheat, you can't only buy expensive clothing. So I propose a different line, and it's this one. If you don't like something a lot, regardless of how much it costs, just skip it. And yeah, that does mean that you'll probably pass up on some cool deals and half-price offers. It means that you probably buy less because you're not allowed anything in this section here. But imagine if every single thing that was in your wardrobe you liked this much. That would be pretty cool. And note, this is not about spending more money on clothing. If anything, the best section is up here, the things that you really love that you didn't spend that much money on. I know what you're thinking, how do we find that? Well, you don't have to spend full luxury price to get clothing you like. You don't always have to buy the most expensive or most premium version of everything either. We want to spend less where we can and still grab some steals that we're gonna love. Thankfully, we do have a lot of ways. Sale shopping, buying things at the end of the season is an easy way to get stuff at much cheaper prices than retail. The Maharishi pants that I'm wearing right now were over half price. I had my eye on them when they released, but I thought they were too expensive. But when those sales started hitting, it brought it down to a price that was a lot more reasonable. Blackbird's Biplane advocate for seeking out unconventional pieces and brands which don't come with a luxury price in the first place, showing some great examples of inexpensive clothing on well-dressed people. Even when these are from non-fashion brands, they can absolutely be worn stylishly. Don't forget that it's very common for luxury fashion houses to take inspiration from and recontextualize practical clothing into fashion items, so why not go straight to the source? If anything, that's a more fashion-forward way of dressing than simply dressing on trend. Secondhand shopping is also a great way of doing this. As you know, I've got some great steals in the past through this method, and if you like the same sort of clothing as me, then I've got some pretty good news. Thanks to this video's paid sponsor Reversible, I've got my own page of curated techwear themed clothing that I've listed for you. It's all stuff that I've featured in past photos and videos, all listed with zero marketplace fees, so you can put this idea into practice. Enfant Leve, Arc'teryx, Acronym, it's all going up to create a super cohesive mini store, and I'm going to do my best to keep those prices low and affordable, so you've got a chance to get some really interesting stuff for much less than retail. And if you think something is worth a little bit less, why not send me a message or use the offer me button? I can even reply with images if you want some extra details. I'm going to be making use of the platform's measurable feature, where I'll be uploading pictures with my username and the Reversible logo to automatically measure the garment dimensions. Super easy to do, just print your personalized logo from this page, take your product pics with it on a flat surface nice and vertical article and upload as normal. Me doing that is way quicker than doing it all manually, and very easy for you to see if something's going to fit you well. I'll probably do some deals if you pick up multiple items at once, and Reversible makes this super easy, since you can add multiple items from one seller to your shopping bag and make a multi-item offer more efficiently than other platforms. Give that a go with my stuff, just don't try and buy absolutely everything. I want multiple people to have a chance to get some cool stuff here. When this video goes live, everything should be up and ready, so I will put a link to that page in the description. Do have a look, see if there's anything you like the look of. A lot of this clothing I have genuinely loved wearing in the past, so I would really like to see that doing the same for you as well. And if you'd rather buy new, which is totally cool, Reversible has built-in price comparison, so you can make sure you're getting the best deals on fresh garms as well as keeping an eye on the sales. Thanks to Reversible for being paid sponsors of the video. So I do think there are a lot of viable ways of getting great clothing more cheaply, even retailers like Uniqlo that I mentioned in the intro. Using this method, it doesn't really matter where the clothing comes from, the only metric is how hyped and genuinely enthusiastic you are about it. Blackbird Spyplane agree that getting clothing on the cheap is pretty cool, even making the process of finding affordable clothing seem more interesting and more authentic than just buying expensive designer stuff. It's time to be clear then, this article isn't writing off affordable clothing conceptually, but rather the idea of affordable alternatives. They do use this phrase as well, but they kind of conflate the two, and I think it's very important to have an understanding of those two terms separately. What is the difference? Well, the latter is clothing that you're seeing in online content, in articles, not because it is affordable, but because it is an alternative to something else. And if that's the best or the most notable quality about that clothing, its similarity to something else, by definition, you're not gonna like it as much as the thing it's an alternative to. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an affordable alternative, it'd just be clothing. I know it sounds really obvious that if you like something, buying something that is kind of similar but not quite what you want is not going to give you lasting satisfaction, but that's the thing. Affordable alternatives do give you satisfaction. You get the short-term thrill of buying something that's like an expensive item, but at a fraction of the price. Unfortunately, that thrill doesn't really last. It's like a sugar rush versus a well-balanced meal. And when that rush is over, you're gonna want to buy something else. Suddenly the affordable alternatives don't look quite so affordable when you're constantly having to consume a new one to keep up that feeling of wardrobe excitement. I'm sure everyone has done this kind of thing at some point. I certainly have in a recent video talking about things I regret buying. I noted these shoes, the Puma Thunder Spectra, which I bought because on a superficial level they're kind of like the Yeezy 700s. And I was happy that I got these for £100 or something like that, and I wore them a few times and then I put them back in the box and I never wore them again. The thrill of getting what I thought was a good deal faded pretty quickly, and I ended up with some shoes that I spent money on that I don't really wear, and ultimately still wanting the shoes that these were an alternative to. The whole industry knows how strong that desire for immediate satisfaction is, which is why there's so much content based around affordable alternatives, and why there are even brands that have sprung up basically entirely to create these products which are like premium or well-desired product, but a little bit cheaper. In fact, if we go a stage further, the entire fast fashion business model is about taking designer clothing and watering it down into a more consumable, easier to purchase version. So time to go back to the graph. Where do we put affordable alternatives? Well, it's not just everything below a certain price point, but it's everything below that price point which doesn't truly satisfy us. And hold on a sec. That's the section we were meant to be avoiding. I've heard people refer to this idea of wanting one thing but buying another as a fashion cope. A lot of the time this is just used to insult people for not buying the absolute most premium, most expensive version of something. Bought a technical jacket that isn't made by acronym? That's a cope. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think that's the case. Things being cheap doesn't automatically make them an alternative to something more expensive, and avoiding affordable alternatives doesn't mean that you need to avoid affordable clothing. In fact, finding affordable clothing that you really like is a double win. I've had this Uniqlo Cause t-shirt for ages, it's got several holes in now, I think it cost me £3. And I know I've mentioned this Stone Island jacket so many times, but I genuinely like this more than modern liner jackets, and it was far cheaper than all of those equivalents, coming in at at about £60. Blackbird Spyplane do try to communicate that they're not intending to be exclusionary or elitist by taking a stand against affordable alternatives like this, instead promoting a more swag positive approach of finding things that you really like at cheap prices. And yet I do still think there's some exclusion or elitism involved in this kind of approach, which most people don't really talk about, because yes, doing secondhand shopping, looking through sales, looking through non-fashion brands, creating non-fashion products which no one else is talking about, all of those things are great, and maybe they don't have a high cost in terms of money, but they do have a high cost in time. There's no getting around that is a more difficult approach of buying clothing. Sifting through pages after pages in the Essence sales, looking through all the stuff in secondhand marketplaces which might not be your size, trying to evaluate whether something is still wearable or absolutely cooked. Not to mention the knowledge or the understanding you need to even attempt things like that. If you don't know where to begin with your style or what kinds of brands can be found at good prices, then you might just find yourself going around in circles and not really finding anything useful. I think everyone has had that experience at some point of clicking through page after page of clothing and just finding absolute garbage. Now myself and a lot of other fashion fans would probably argue that that is a worthy time investment, especially if you want to take a more active interest in fashion. I certainly want to empower people to take that attitude, and I think it's really cool to see people dressing in brands that other people aren't as familiar with, or have purchased something from an older season, not brand new stock. But at the same time, we should be understanding that not everyone shares our passion or level of enthusiasm for clothing, or has the privilege of the time needed to develop an encyclopedic understanding of different fashion brands and styles, or the time to hunt down deals on various websites. I certainly don't want people to feel like they're whack just because they picked up the Zara pleated pants and not the Issey Miyake ones, which, let's face it, are prohibitively expensive. Or using SEO-powered clothing you should buy right now type content because it's quick and it's efficient. It'll show people things that they might like. That's why it's nice to see trends or popular items that aren't crazy exclusive. When Balenciaga, Gucci and McQueen shoes were the hottest thing to own, few people really got to experience that. But when we're talking now and things like the Samba are still super popular, well, a lot more people can get involved in trying something like that. And what's more, the alternatives to a shoe like the Samba, the Cortez, the Handball, the Mexico 66, they're not these compromised, affordable alternative type choices which are taking away or you're losing something versus the original, but they are just genuine alternatives which have slightly different aesthetics and might appeal to different people. I got these Y3 Marathon TRs half price, so they were maybe £30 more expensive than a full price Samba, and these, yeah, are an alternative to that. But I don't feel like these are a compromised product. They've got something about the Samba, that retro Adidas sneaker look, but also something that appeals to me specifically, a more futuristic and performance-focused edge. We've talked a lot about the relationship between clothing, its value to you, and whether it represents a compromised alternative or something you really like. But if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this video, it's this. The only person who gets to decide if something is a whack, affordable alternative is you. Only you know if the thing that you're buying is a compromise for something you actually wanted, or something that you genuinely like for what it is. So if you're hyped on something, don't let anyone tell you that you shouldn't like it because a more expensive or a more luxurious version exists. I want to make it as clear as possible that yes, I'm always going to advocate for buying well-made, interesting, creative clothing, but buying something that you really like doesn't have to be about seeking out the most expensive or the most luxurious thing. And if you're shopping exclusively in this zone, you will still find clothing that you like at the top of that scale. In the long term, you'll build up a discerning taste of what really appeals to you and develop that wardrobe of stuff that you can actually get excited about. Question is though, do you think you can take this no compromise attitude to what you're buying? Or do you think there are times where these affordable alternatives can have their own value? Do they let you, for example, try out a new aesthetic without having to spend that luxury fashion money? Or are they genuinely beneficial in helping to solve a problem for a wider fashion audience that just wants to look good relatively easily and not spend hours and hours and hours trying to curate that rare affordable drip? Let me know your opinion on that and on the Blackbird spyplane article. I'll put a link to it in the description. And of course, if you like the same sort of clothing as me, don't forget to check out my curated reversible page, which is also down there. Maybe you'll find something that you really love. If you love the video though, please do give it a like because it massively helps out the channel and I do want to hear your thoughts as always. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. I will catch you very soon because I've got some cool stuff coming up in the next one.